My name is Rebecca Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and the day I found out my parents had sold the house my grandmother left me, the house that was supposed to be mine, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee, still in my pajamas, completely unprepared for what was coming. It wasn't a phone call, it wasn't a letter, it was a simple Google alert. I had set it up months ago for my grandmother's address because I was thinking about renting the property out while I figured out what to do with it. The alert came in like any other notification. I almost swiped it away without reading it, but something made me stop. The headline was from a local real estate listing site. The address was 412 Maple Creek Drive, Sycamore Falls, Tennessee. My grandmother's address, my grandmother's house. The house she had left specifically to me in a handwritten will, notarized and witnessed. The house where I had spent every summer of my childhood, where I learned to bake biscuits on a cast iron skillet, where I once cried on the porch steps after my first heartbreak and my grandmother sat beside me without saying a single word, just sat there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her. That house was listed for sale for $340,000. And the seller's name listed in the contact section was not mine. It was my father's. I set my coffee mug down very carefully. My hands were shaking, but I set it down gently, like one wrong move would shatter everything. And I just stood there in my kitchen, staring at my phone screen, reading the listing over and over, waiting for it to make sense. It never did. But what happened next, what I discovered over the following 2 weeks, changed everything I thought I knew about my family. And at the very end, buried in a box I almost threw away, I found one piece of paper that changed everything back. Stay with me, because this story is about betrayal, but it is also about love. And it is about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you forget that they made a promise. Let me take you back a little, not too far, just enough so you understand. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Georgia called Hartwell. My parents, Donald and Patricia Calloway, were what most people would call good, hard-working people. My father was an insurance adjuster. My mother taught 4th grade for 22 years. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We lived in a clean brick house with a vegetable garden in the backyard, and a dog named Biscuit, who ate more than he should have. I have one older brother. His name is Marcus. He is 38 now, and for most of our childhood, Marcus was the son my father had always imagined having. He played football. He was loud and confident. He went to the same college my father went to, pledged the same fraternity, and came home on holidays with a big smile and stories that made everyone laugh. I was quieter, more serious. I liked reading. I liked art. I liked my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Eloise Calloway. She was my father's mother. She lived in Sycamore Falls, Tennessee, a small, slow town nestled up near the mountains, where she had raised my father and his 2 sisters in a house she and my grandfather had built themselves in 1967. My grandfather died when I was 4. I don't really remember him, but I remember the house. I remember the smell of cedar and old quilts. I remember the yellow kitchen and the way light came through the windows in the late afternoon like honey. Every summer, from the time I was 6 until I turned 17, my parents drove me and Marcus up to Sycamore Falls for 2 weeks. Marcus always complained. He wanted to be back home with his friends. He would spend most of the visit watching television or riding his bike into town, but I never wanted to leave. Grandma Eloise and I had something. I don't know how else to describe it. We understood each other in a quiet way that didn't need a lot of explaining. She taught me how to sew. She taught me how to press wildflowers in a heavy book and then frame them with old wood. She told me stories about her childhood that she had never told anyone else. Stories about being a young woman in the South in the 1950s, about dignity and stubbornness and refusing to shrink. When I was 16, she pulled me aside one afternoon while we were sitting on the back porch. She took my hand in her dry, warm hands and she said, "Rebecca, I want you to have this house when I'm gone. You're the only one who loves it the way I do." I told her not to talk like that. She smiled and said, "I'm not being morbid. I'm being practical. I just want you to know." I didn't think about it much after that. You don't when you're 16. Death is abstract. The future is abstract. You just nod and feel vaguely honored and then go back inside and eat the peach cobbler that's been cooling on the counter. But Grandma Eloise was not the kind of woman who said things she didn't mean. She passed away in March of last year at the age of 87, peacefully, in her bed, with a neighbor named Carol, holding her hand because none of us could get there in time. By the time I drove up from Atlanta, where I had been living for the past 6 years, she was already gone. The grief was quiet and heavy, the way grief is when you lose someone old and good who lived a full life. You don't fall apart. You just feel like someone turned down the volume on everything. The funeral was small. My father gave a short speech. My uncle flew in from Phoenix. My mother cried softly and held a tissue the whole time. Afterward, back at the house, my father's older sister, Aunt Lorraine, pulled a manila envelope out of her bag and placed it on the kitchen table. "Mama left a will," she said, "handwritten, but it's notarized. She told me to give it out after the service." Everyone gathered around the table. The will was simple. Grandma Eloise had divided a few things among her children, a set of china to Aunt Lorraine, a specific savings account to my father and his younger sister Linda to split, some jewelry and personal items. And then, near the bottom, in her careful, slanted handwriting, was this: "The house and property at 4 and 12 Maple Creek Drive, Sycamore Falls, Tennessee, I leave entirely and solely to my granddaughter, Rebecca Calloway. She knows why." I felt the tears come then, finally, for the first time since I had arrived. My father nodded slowly. He didn't say anything right away. My mother put her hand on my shoulder. Marcus looked at the paper for a moment and then said, "That's a lot of responsibility for you, Becca." I didn't think anything of that sentence at the time. I should have. The weeks after the funeral were busy in the way grief weeks always are. Paperwork, condolence calls, going through belongings, donating things to the church. I stayed in Sycamore Falls for almost 2 weeks, longer than anyone else. I wanted to be there. I sorted through Grandma Eloise's things carefully, wrapping her dishes in newspaper, folding her quilts. I found boxes of photographs I had never seen. I found letters she had written to my grandfather in the 1960s that I couldn't bring myself to read. I locked up the house carefully when I left. I made sure the neighbor Carol had a spare key in case of emergencies. I took one of the small framed wildflower prints off the wall and put it in my bag. Back in Atlanta, I contacted a probate attorney to begin the process of transferring the deed. The attorney, a calm woman named Greta Simmons, told me it would take a few months, but was straightforward since the will was properly notarized. That was April. In May, my father called me. We talked every week or two, not close calls, not distant ones, just the normal rhythm of adult children and aging parents. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was fine, still processing everything. He said he missed her too. Then, near the end of the call, he said something that I almost let slide. "Your mother and I were thinking," he said, "that it might make more sense to sell the property in Sycamore Falls rather than leave it sitting empty." I paused. "Sell it?" "Just thinking practically. It needs maintenance. The roof has some age on it. Property taxes. It's a lot for you to manage from Atlanta." "Dad," I said carefully, "Grandma left it to me. I'm not sure I want to sell it." "I know," he said. "Of course, just something to think about." I told him I would think about it. But even as I said it, something felt off. Something in his voice. Too casual, too practiced, like he had rehearsed that part of the conversation. I told myself I was being paranoid. My father was just being practical. He had always been practical. I filed it away and went back to my life. That was my second mistake. My first was not securing the deed faster. In June, my brother Marcus called me. This was unusual. Marcus and I were not close in the way that some siblings are. We were polite, family reunion close, Christmas card close. He didn't call just to talk. "Hey, Becca," he said. He always called me Becca, even though I had asked him to stop when I was about 12. "How are you doing with everything?" "Okay," I said. "Working through the estate stuff." Right. A pause. "Listen, I just want to say, I think whatever you decide about the house is totally your call. I just want to make sure you know that." I frowned at my phone. "Okay, why are you saying that?" "No reason. Just, you know." Family stuff can get complicated. I just want you to know I'm in your corner. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a long moment, feeling the way you feel when you know something is wrong, but you don't have a name for it yet. Something was happening. Something had already been decided somewhere without me. I just didn't know what yet. The Google alert came on a Tuesday morning in July. I have already told you what I saw. The listing, the address, my father's name as the contact. I stood in my kitchen for probably 3 full minutes before I moved. Then I sat down at my table and I opened my laptop and I pulled up the full listing. It was detailed. Professional photos. Someone had gone into the house and staged it, or at least cleaned it up. The living room looked beautiful. The kitchen with the yellow walls. The back porch where Grandma Eloise had told me she wanted me to have the house. The listing said, charming mountain area property, fully updated, move-in ready. Contact Donald Calloway for showings, fully updated. They had done work on it. While I was in Atlanta, thinking the probate was processing, someone had gone into that house and updated it for sale. I called my attorney, Greta Simmons, first. Greta, I said, I need you to tell me where things stand on the deed transfer for 412 Maple Creek Drive. A short pause. Rebecca, actually, I received a communication last week that I was planning to call you about. There seems to be a competing claim on the property. My stomach dropped. What kind of competing claim? Your father has filed a document claiming that the handwritten will is invalid. He's retained an attorney in Sycamore Falls who is arguing that your grandmother lacked testamentary capacity at the time the will was written. I couldn't speak for a moment. Testamentary capacity, I finally said. They're saying she wasn't of sound mind. That's what they're arguing, yes. Greta. My voice was very steady now, the kind of steady that only comes when you are truly, deeply furious. My grandmother was sharp until the day she died. She was doing crossword puzzles the week before she passed. Her doctor will tell you that. I believe you, Greta said, but until this is resolved legally, the deed transfer is on hold, and she hesitated. Rebecca, if your father has listed the property for sale, that's a serious problem. He does not currently have legal authority to sell it. He knows that, I said. He may be betting that a sale will close before the probate matter is fully settled. Some buyers don't do thorough enough title searches on estate properties. I thanked her and hung up, and then I called my father. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, like nothing was happening. Hey, sweetheart. Dad. I kept my voice even. I had learned a long time ago that anger doesn't work in conversations like this. Calm is more powerful. I saw the listing. Silence. I know what you're doing, I said, and I need to understand why. Another silence. Then he sighed. Not the sigh of a man caught doing something wrong. The sigh of a man who had prepared for this conversation and was settling into his prepared position. Rebecca, he said, that house is worth $340,000. That is a significant asset. Your mother and I are getting older. Marcus has 3 kids now. There are people in this family who need that money more practically than me, I said. I didn't say that. Dad, Grandma left it to me. She left it specifically to me. You were there. You read the will. Handwritten wills are contested all the time, he said. Our attorney believes we have a case. Your attorney. I let that sit for a second. So, this has been planned. For how long? He didn't answer that. Dad, how long? We had some conversations after the funeral, he said. Your mother, Marcus, and I, about what made the most sense for the family. The words landed like stones. My mother, my brother, all 3 of them. While I was sleeping, while I was grieving, while I was in Sycamore Falls wrapping my grandmother's dishes in newspaper, the 3 of them were sitting around a table somewhere, deciding to take what wasn't theirs. Does Marcus know you've listed the house? I asked. Marcus is supportive, my father said carefully. I thought about Marcus calling me in June. I just want you to know I'm in your corner. He had been warning me, or trying to. In his cowardly sideways way, he had tried to tell me without telling me. I'm not going to let you do this, I said. My father's voice shifted, not angry, something worse, patient, like he was talking to a difficult child. Rebecca, I hope you'll think about this rationally. Fighting a legal battle over a property is expensive and painful. We're family. We can come to an agreement? You had an agreement with me, I said. It was written in Grandma Eloise's handwriting and signed in front of a notary. That was the agreement. I hung up. I sat at my table for a long time after that. I did not cry. I thought. The next 2 weeks were among the hardest of my life, and not in the dramatic movie-style way. They were hard in the grinding, exhausting, bureaucratic way that real betrayal actually feels. A lot of paperwork, a lot of phone calls, a lot of waiting on hold. Greta Simmons filed an emergency motion to freeze the sale pending resolution of the estate dispute. That bought us some time, but only a little. I drove up to Sycamore Falls on a Thursday, telling no one I was coming. I went to the house. Someone had put a lockbox on the front door, the kind real estate agents use. I stood on the porch for a long time, looking at that lockbox where my grandmother's front door key used to hang on a small hook shaped like a bird. I called Carol, the neighbor. Carol was a 70-year-old woman with white hair and strong opinions, and she had been my grandmother's closest friend for nearly 30 years. She came across the yard in her slippers when she saw me on the porch. "Rebecca," she said, and hugged me tight. "I've been waiting for you to come." We sat in Carol's kitchen and she made tea and she told me everything she knew. "Your father came up here about 6 weeks after the funeral," Carol said. "Him and that brother of yours. They spent 2 days at the house. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought they were settling things, but then I saw men come with measuring tape and then paint cans, and I thought, does Rebecca know about this?" "No," I said. "I didn't." Carol set her teacup down and looked at me steadily. "Your grandmother loved you very much, Rebecca. She talked about you all the time. She used to say, 'Carol, Rebecca is the one who will take care of this old house. She's the one who feels it the way I do.'" I pressed my lips together. "She was very deliberate about that will," Carol said. "She sat right here in this kitchen and she told me exactly what she was leaving to who. She was clear as a bell." "You witnessed the will?" I said. I knew this from the document. Carol's signature was one of the 2 witness signatures. "I did," Carol said. "Me and Pastor Gaines from the Methodist church down the road. She called us over specifically for it, said she wanted people who loved her and had no stake in anything." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the will. "Carol, is there anything else she said that day? Anything I should know?" Carol was quiet for a moment. She said one thing that I remember. She said, "I know Donald will fight this. He's always thought that house should come back to him because he grew up in it. But it's not his house anymore. It was mine and Elton's, and now it's Rebecca's." She said that like she had already had the argument with him in her head. I stared at the table. "She knew," I said. "She knew," Carol confirmed. I stayed in Sycamore Falls for 3 days. I met with Greta's local contact, a probate attorney named James Whitfield, who was small and precise and wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He reviewed everything and was quietly optimistic, but he told me plainly that the case could take 6 to 8 months if my father's attorney was determined to draw it out. 6 to 8 months, during which a sale could potentially go through if any buyer wasn't careful. I drove home on Sunday night feeling heavy and tired and no closer to a solution. But on the way home, I stopped at a gas station and called my brother. "Marcus," I said when he answered. "Becca." His voice was careful. "I know you tried to warn me," I said. "In June, that phone call." A long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And I need you to be honest with me right now, because I have never once in our lives asked you for anything. I'm asking now. What do you know?" Silence stretched out. I could hear him breathing. Then, quietly, he said, "They had a meeting after the funeral, Dad and Mom and the attorney. I was there, Becca. Dad had already been in contact with the attorney before Grandma even passed. The coldness that moved through me was something I don't have words for." "Before she passed," I repeated. "He knew she was going to leave the house to you," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "He'd been angry about it for a long time. He thought, because he was her son, because he grew up there, he thought it should be his, or at least should stay in the direct family line." "I am the direct family line," I said. I know, Becca. I didn't fight it the way I should have. I want you to know I feel bad about that." Feeling bad isn't enough, Marcus. I know, he said again, small. What do you need? I need you to be willing to say what you just told me. In writing, if it comes to that. Another long pause. That would put me against Dad. You've been against me for months by staying quiet, I said. It wasn't cruel. It was just true. He didn't have an answer for that. I told him to think about it and hung up. And I drove the rest of the way home in silence, watching the highway lights streak past, thinking about my grandmother and what she had known and what she had tried to prepare for. She had known her son well enough to know he would fight. She must have prepared something, but I hadn't found it yet. It was a Wednesday morning, 10 days later, when I found it. I had gone back to Sycamore Falls. I had been making the drive almost every weekend now, doing what I could to slow the sale, meeting with attorneys, talking to anyone who knew my grandmother. The house was still locked up with the realtor's lockbox, but Greta had sent a legal letter to my father's attorney, making clear that any sale would be aggressively challenged. I wasn't staying at the house. I was staying with Carol. But that Wednesday morning, I went to the house early, before anyone else was around. Greta had obtained a temporary order allowing me access as the named beneficiary in the disputed will. I had a key. I went inside alone. It was strange, being there in the quiet. The house smelled different now, less like Grandma Eloise, more like fresh paint and that particular neutral cleanliness of a staged home. The yellow kitchen walls had been repainted white. I stood in the kitchen and felt the loss of that yellow like a physical ache. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just felt like there was something I had missed the first time. I walked through every room slowly. I looked in closets. I pulled back the rug in the hallway to check the floorboards underneath. I had seen Grandma Eloise do that once, years ago, and she'd smiled and said, "That's where the serious things live." But there was nothing under the rug. I went to the bedroom. It was stripped now, the bed frame still there but no mattress, the closet empty. I sat on the bare box spring and looked around the room. There was a bookshelf against the wall, half empty now. Someone had taken most of the books already. But on the very bottom shelf, pushed to the back, almost invisible, was a small metal lockbox. The same kind you can buy at a hardware store for about $20. I had seen that box before, years ago, when I was maybe 12. I had asked Grandma Eloise what was in it, and she had said important papers. I had not thought of it since. It was still locked. But the key, I remembered this suddenly, with that strange clarity that grief sometimes unlocks. The key was on her keychain. The keychain I had held onto, the keychain that was still in my bag. I dug through my bag with shaking hands. There it was, her house key, a small key to a filing cabinet, and a third tiny key I had never tried to identify. I picked up the metal box and inserted the small key. It opened. Inside was a thin stack of papers held together with a rubber band with a handwritten note on top. For Rebecca, in case they try. Grandma Eloise. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the papers on the floor and sit cross-legged to read them. The first document was a letter from a real estate attorney in Knoxville, dated 8 months before my grandmother's death. It was addressed to Grandma Eloise. It acknowledged receipt of her request and confirmed that a separate legal instrument had been prepared. The second document was that instrument. It was a deed of gift, a legal document prepared by a licensed attorney, properly executed, properly notarized, transferring ownership of 412 Maple Creek Drive, Sycamore Falls, Tennessee from Eloise Margaret Calloway to Rebecca Ann Calloway, effective upon Eloise's death, signed by my grandmother, signed by the attorney, notarized with a raised seal. Grandma Eloise had not only written a will, she had executed a legal deed transfer prepared by a separate attorney in a different city, and she had kept it hidden in a lockbox in her bedroom because she had known She had known that her son would try to contest the will. She had made it so he couldn't. A deed of gift, once properly executed and filed, supersedes a contested will on real property in most states, including Tennessee. It is not subject to probate in the same way. It is not a letter of intent. It is a transfer of legal title. My grandmother had, in effect, already given me the house before she died. The will was her message. The deed was her protection. I sat on the floor of her empty bedroom for a long time, holding those papers against my chest, and I cried. Not the restrained, quiet crying I had done at the funeral, but real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and old, the kind you didn't know you had been holding back. I cried because she had known, because she had planned for this, because even in her 80s, even knowing she was running out of time, she had sat across a desk from a real estate attorney in Knoxville and asked him to make sure her granddaughter was protected. She had known her son would try, and she had made sure he couldn't win. I called Greta Simmons from the floor of that bedroom. "Greta," I said, "I need you to look up something about a deed of gift in Tennessee. Executed pre-death, proper notarization, real estate attorney. Tell me what I'm looking at." I heard her typing. I read her the relevant details. There was a pause while she processed. Then she said very quietly, "Rebecca, if this document is what you're describing, properly executed and filed with the county, the property transferred to you at the moment of your grandmother's death. The will is actually secondary. The deed is the operative instrument." "It's real," I said. "I'm holding it." "Do you see a recording stamp?" she said. "A notation that it was filed with the county recorder's office?" I looked at the document more carefully. There, in the upper right corner, was a faint stamped notation with a date, a book number, and a page number from the Sullivan County Register of Deeds. My grandmother had filed it. The deed was already on record, had been on record since 10 months before her death. "It's recorded," I said. There was a breath on the other end of the line. "Then your father does not own that property and never did," Greta said. "And any sale he attempts to execute would be fraudulent transfer of title that he does not hold. Rebecca, this changes everything. We need to meet." I drove directly to Greta's office in Knoxville that same afternoon. She confirmed everything within 2 hours. The deed was clean, properly executed, and had been on public record for nearly a year. My father's attorneys, and presumably my father himself, had either not done a thorough title search or had done one and chosen to proceed anyway, hoping I wouldn't find the deed before a sale went through. Either way, the listing on the house was an attempt to sell property that my father had no legal authority to sell. Greta prepared a letter to my father's attorney that afternoon. It was precise and formal and left no room for interpretation. It included a certified copy of the deed, a copy of the county recording stamp, and a clear statement that any sale of the property would constitute fraud and would be immediately met with legal action. She also contacted the real estate agent who had listed the house, informing them of the title dispute and the recorded deed in my name. The listing was taken down within 24 hours. I waited 2 days before I called my parents. I wanted to be steady when I did. I wanted every word to be calm, my mother answered. "Hi, honey," she said, and her voice had that particular tone, slightly high, slightly bright, that told me she was nervous. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Is Dad there?" Yes, hold on," I heard murmuring. Then my father's voice, level. "Rebecca." "Dad," I said, "I'm going to be brief because I think brief is the right way to do this. I found Grandma Eloise's deed of gift. It's been recorded in Sullivan County for almost a year. The property legally transferred to me at the moment of her death. You don't own it. You never did. I've instructed my attorney to notify your attorney and the listing agent. The sale is not going to happen." Silence. "I also want you to know," I continued, "that I am not going to sue you, not because I couldn't. My attorney has been very clear that there are grounds for a fraud claim given that you listed property you had no title to, but because you are my parents and I still, despite everything, do not want to do that to you." More silence. "But I need you to understand something," I said. What you did was not practical. It was not sensible family planning. It was taking something from me that my grandmother wanted me to have and that I loved and that she left me deliberately. She knew you might try. That is why she had a second attorney in a different city prepare a deed. She planned for your betrayal. I heard my mother make a small sound. I'm not saying this to hurt you, I said. I'm saying it because I need you to sit with that. Your own mother expected you to go against her wishes, and you proved her right. My father finally spoke. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Rebecca, I'm not done, I said. I'm going to keep the house. I'm going to go there in the summers, and I'm going to sit on the back porch the way Grandma Eloise and I used to. And I'm going to keep the yellow walls in the kitchen because someone repainted them white, and that was wrong. I'm going to repaint them yellow. A pause. That's all I have to say right now, I said. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. I ended the call. I sat very still in my Atlanta apartment in the quiet that followed, and I felt something unfamiliar. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something closer to sorrow that had been allowed, finally, to settle. The legal matter was resolved within 6 weeks of Greta's letter. My father's attorney withdrew the challenge to the will. There was nothing left to challenge. The will was secondary to the deed, and the deed was iron. My father did not call me for almost 2 months. When he did, it was a short call. He said he was sorry. He said he had let greed get in the way of what was right and that he knew it. He said my grandmother would have been disappointed in him. I told him I believed him. I also told him that trust, once broken the way ours had been broken, doesn't just come back on its own. It takes time and it takes work, and I was willing to do the work if he was. But I wasn't going to pretend nothing had happened. He said he understood. My mother called me a week later and cried for most of the phone call. She said she had known it was wrong from the beginning, but had told herself it was about the family's financial security and had let herself believe that. She said she was ashamed of herself. I told her I loved her. I also told her the same thing I had told my father, that love and trust are not the same thing, and I was working on both. Marcus was the one who surprised me most. He called me about 3 weeks after everything was settled. He asked if he could come visit me in Atlanta. Just him, not to talk about any of it, just to spend some time together. He said he missed me. He said he'd felt like a coward for a long time and didn't want to be one anymore. He came the following weekend. We went for a long walk along the Beltline. We didn't talk about the house at first. We talked about his kids, about my job, about small, stupid things, and then at some point, he stopped walking and turned to look at me. I should have told you the night I found out what they were planning, he said, right after that meeting after the funeral. I should have called you that night. I've thought about it every day since. Why didn't you? I asked, not unkindly, just honestly. He thought about it for a moment. Because I was scared of being the one who made waves. I've spent my whole life not making waves in that family. I know, I said. That's not an excuse, he said. No, I agreed. It's not, but it's real. We walked in silence for a bit. Then I said, I want you to come to Sycamore Falls sometime when I go up to work on the house. He looked at me. Yeah? Yeah. There are things in that house, things of Grandma's, that I think you'd want. Old photographs, some of Granddad's stuff. I don't think she meant for me to have all of it, just the house. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said in a rough voice, I'd really like that. We walked the rest of the way without talking much, but it was the comfortable kind of quiet, the beginning of something being rebuilt. Section 9. The House. I went back to Sycamore Falls in October, when the mountains had gone gold and orange and the air had turned sharp and clean. I stayed for a full week. The first thing I did was drive to the hardware store and buy 2 gallons of yellow paint. It took me an afternoon to repaint the kitchen. I am not a skilled painter. There were drips and uneven patches, and one area near the window I had to do 3 times. But when I stepped back and looked at the yellow walls in the late afternoon light, I felt something settle in my chest that had not been settled in a long time. I put Grandma Eloise's cast iron skillet back on the hook by the stove where it belonged. I found the small, framed wildflower print I had taken when I left after the funeral and hung it back on the wall in the living room. I swept the back porch and put two chairs out there, the old wooden rockers that had always been there, and I sat in one of them as the light faded over the mountains, and I talked to my grandmother out loud, the way you do when someone is gone and you still have things to say. I told her I had found the deed. I told her she had been smarter than all of them. I told her the kitchen was yellow again. The mountains were very still. The air smelled like pine and the distant smoke of a neighbor's wood fire. A bird called somewhere in the trees twice and then went quiet. I sat there for a long time. Before I left at the end of that week, I drove down to Pastor Gaines at the Methodist Church and I thanked him for witnessing the will. He was a gentleman in his 70s who remembered my grandmother fondly and said she had been the most organized and intentional person he had ever known. She came to me with that will like she had thought it through 100 times, he said. She knew exactly what she wanted and why. She said to me, Pastor, I have a granddaughter who loves that old house the way I do, and I want to make sure it finds its way to her no matter what. And then she told me she had already made other arrangements just to be safe with the deed. She wanted 2 layers, she called it. 2 layers. Even in her 80s, making sure she had 2 layers of protection for me. She was something, I said. She was, he agreed. On my last morning in Sycamore Falls, I sat at the yellow kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the early mountain light coming through the windows, and I thought about what a strange and painful and ultimately clarifying year it had been. I had lost my grandmother. I had nearly lost her house. I had found out that the people closest to me could be capable of a betrayal I would not have believed possible a year before. I had also found out that my grandmother had known things about human nature, about her son's nature, that I had not known and had quietly, without drama, protected me anyway. And I had found the paper, that small, legal, stamped, recorded document that had been sitting in a lockbox in a bedroom, waiting for me to need it. She had put it there for me. She had always known I would come looking. Still go to Sycamore Falls 4 or 5 times a year. The house is mine now, fully and legally and completely. In the spring, I planted a garden in the back. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes and basil and a row of zinnias because Grandma Eloise always said zinnias were the most cheerful flower, and she was right. My relationship with my parents is different now. Not broken, not entirely, but changed in the way that a bone changes after it heals. It's solid, but you can feel where the break was. I think that's honest. I think pretending the break didn't happen would be worse. My father drives up with me sometimes now. He doesn't say much when he's there. He tends to walk through the house quietly, touching the walls, pausing in the kitchen. I think being there does something to him. I think he feels his mother more in that house than he does anywhere else. And I hope, he feels the weight of what he almost did. I don't say any of that out loud. Some things are better left to the quiet. Marcus came up in August with his 2 oldest kids. We spent a Saturday going through boxes in the back room and found a trove of old photographs. My grandfather as a young man, my father as a little boy, Grandma Eloise in her 20s, beautiful and serious, standing on the very same back porch where I now sit with my coffee in the mornings. Marcus took a box of photographs home with him. His kids ran around the yard and called it the mountain house and asked when they could come back. Anytime, I told them, and I meant it. This is Grandma Eloise's house, but it is also my house now. And one day, I think about this sometimes on the back porch watching the mountains. One day, it will belong to someone else I love. Someone who will feel it the way I do. Because that's what she meant when she said she knew why. She knew I was the one who would sit on this porch and feel the weight of the mountains and not want to leave. She knew I would take care of it. She was right. She was always right. And in the end, in the very end, she made sure I could.